Hi everyone, welcome to HEOS Talks, talks that focus on helping each other succeed. I'm your host, Marieke Jonkman, and in today's episode of HEOS Talks, we're in for a truly enriching experience with Dr. Eddie Power. Fasten your seatbelts because we're in for a ride with a view from the top. Literally. Because Eddie wasn't born under a rock. No, he was born on the Rock of Gibraltar, to be precise. Now, from that sturdy foundation, he's climbed to impressive heights as a beacon in the pharmaceutical industry. With a quarter-century of experience that spans the globe, Eddie's name is synonymous with innovation, trust, and strategies that not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, right through the corridors of medical affairs and scientific communications. He's not just about the science, he's also about the story. And today he's here to share the tales that twist and turn and that dive into our psyche and remind us that perspective is everything. And a single lecture can be as monumental as Gibraltar itself. So please join me today in welcoming Dr. Eddie Power, and let's dive into the story of a man who empowers the narrative of medicine. And let's learn how sometimes a rocky start can lead to the most solid of standings. Eddie, it's an honor to have you here on HEOS Talks. Thank you for being a guiding star for many of us, including myself. So let's dive in.
Thank you, Marieke. Excited to be here with you and really grateful for having me and being able to share some of my stories.
That's wonderful. So every story starts at the beginning, and you started on the Rock of Gibraltar. So living on such a small space, how has this unique start influenced your career throughout?
You know, one of the things for me, Marieke, when I was growing up, was I could see Africa right across, almost literally within touching distance.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, we were confined to the rock because of the political situation at the time with Spain. But the expanse and the geography was so spectacular. Africa to one side, Europe to the other, the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea meeting together. And for me, that always spurred me on to want to explore the world and really look out for what was a potential opportunity for me. I always had the travel bug in me since then. And to leave the rock, literally, you had to get on a plane, fly to the UK, or jump on a boat and head over to Africa. So I think from a young age, I always had that fascination to really expand my horizon and not be physically confined anywhere.
I'm glad you mentioned planes, because let's rewind a little bit to your very first lecture, because that was one that solidified in many ways your perspective on careers in the future. So can you tell us what happened in your very first lecture?
Absolutely. I was working at medical school in London, and it was my very first lecture in a new position that I had just obtained. So I walked into this lecture hall with about 300 medical and dental students, and I had spent hours working on these slides. It was the days of the old overhead projectors. So you can imagine all different colored pens, and everything took a long time to get together. And I was in the Department of Microbiology back then. So that was the topic of my lecture. And I started off throwing out Latin names like confetti, Staphylococcus aureus this, Escherichia coli that. And I thought I was doing a wonderful and fabulous job, but literally within 10 minutes, I saw this paper aeroplane out of the corner of my eye come from the back of the lecture theatre. And literally within 5 minutes, the whole student cohort was throwing paper planes across the room. They were throwing paper balls, and I'd completely lost the audience. And I was so devastated. I thought I had done a fabulous job, and I remember walking into my professor's office straight after, really devastated and at a loss. And he sat me down and he said, look, he said, you just need to put yourself in their shoes. Most of them don't care about infectious disease. You know, they want to be surgeons or gastroenterologists or dentists, and they only need to know enough about infectious disease. So just make sure that you're communicating not what you think they should be hearing, but try and look at it from their perspective and tailor the communication and the message that you want to give to something that adds meaning and value for them in their careers. And to this day, Marika, I still keep a paper aeroplane
Mm-hmm.
on my desk just to remind myself that whatever I do is done with somebody else's needs, and whatever the value that they're looking for, I can give.
Yeah. First of all, I would have been so mortified if that had happened to me. I may have burst out entirely into tears right then and there. So I admire your courage to continue the lecture. But you give two very important points. And one is you always have to make sure that whatever you deliver meets the needs of the person so they can actually receive it. And the second is you need to learn to understand what people's perspective is. And so with perspective being key, could you share an instance where a shift in viewpoint for you transformed, like a challenge into an opportunity?
Yeah, for me, Marika, one of the things that I've seen in medical affairs over the years is that we can get very close to our own data.
Mm-hmm.
And we often say that facts and data are the North Star, and that's what drives us forward. So there is an element of truth to that, obviously, but the context is just so important.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I started working and traveling across the globe, it was just a simple world map or
Mm-hmm.
juxtaposition of two world maps that were really an aha moment for me. I grew up with a world map where the UK was in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
Americas were to the west, and Asia and China were to the east. But in some countries in Asia, China's right in the middle of that world map. And now suddenly the Americas are to the east
Mm-hmm.
instead of the west, which is the way that I had been brought up. But the context there is so important in the way that you look at the world and in the way that we may look at facts and data. So, with that analogy, those facts and data don't
Mm-hmm.
change. They're still exactly the same, but the context in which you look at those facts and data really can change somebody's view and position. So, to my mind, I've always tried to take more of a systematic approach. If we've had a new study that we're talking about, trying to look at the context that I'm placing those facts and data in. And it could be very different. A pharmacist may be looking for something that's very different to a prescribing physician,
Mm-hmm.
that may be very different to an infusion nurse.
Mm-hmm.
They're all looking for different things because it's framed in the context that they work in, and that they apply that knowledge to, rather than what I think
Mm-hmm.
their context should be. So for me, it was very formative, and the privilege of being able to work across so many geographies and so many cultures in my career um, has certainly given me, I think, that perspective where having somebody else's perspective and viewpoint in mind
Mm-hmm.
can just be so influential and so critical in what you're trying to achieve.
Right. I find the analogy of the maps very, very wonderful and very illustrative, because reality stays the same, but how we look at certain facts is actually going to determine how we look at the world in general. So taking it a little bit outside of medical affairs, which I know is your specialty, but how can people in general, if somebody is looking like, from accounting, for instance, how can they apply, looking at things in a different perspective to their life and to their job?
Yes, I always like to use analogies,
Mm-hmm.
like to tell the story, because it's something that helps people identify with something. And I always use the example in medical affairs or anywhere else where you can get very focused on your own little domain. And I
Mm-hmm.
always use the example of somebody who's working on a new synthetic oil for a car engine,
Mm-hmm.
and you focus on that synthetic oil, and it may be fantastic, it may be much better than what was already there. And one of the things you may say, well, you can accelerate from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds instead of 10 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
which is great, but maybe only if you've got a car that you use on a racetrack. But if you drive a car in a city with traffic lights and pedestrian crossings, that 0 to 60 in 5 seconds becomes, completely relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of this is that you need to be thinking more holistically about the overall system
Mm-hmm.
that you're in, and that any change or anything new that you bring in has to somehow form part of that system and make sure that it works seamlessly within that overall system. And you can apply that to medicine, you can apply that to accounting,
Mm-hmm.
you can apply it really to any profession globally. So, instead of then becoming a synthetic oil expert, now you're thinking of yourself as a transportation guru,
Mm-hmm.
and you understand how everything works within that whole transportation system, and how a car fits in with a railway network, or with a bus network, or even with airplanes, as we were talking before,
Right.
and how all those things work together, to get to the outcome that you want, which is to get from point A to B as effectively and as safely as you can.
Right. I love that analogy, and especially tying it back to airplanes. But you bring up something different as well, which I'd love to touch upon for a little bit. So, looking at things holistically requires sometimes a radical change from our current thinking, and having a radical change can invoke fear with people. And sometimes fear can be paralyzing, and sometimes it can propel people forward. Um, can you share a time where fear was, driving you in a particular direction, and how you used that to propel yourself forward?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest changes for me professionally was transitioning from a medical school environment that was more academic into pharma industry. And one of the things that I hadn't really anticipated was the speed and the frequency of change
Mm-hmm.
within pharma companies, restructures, reorganizations. And the very first time that I was faced with a reorganization, I was afraid of my job, I was afraid of my role. Um, and I talked to a few of my friends and mentors, and the most valuable lesson for me was, well, why don't you use that as an opportunity instead of a challenge to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you network and get to know people, and perhaps drive yourself to see what other areas you might add value
Mm-hmm.
in, and you can add value in? And for me, the biggest opportunity was that it took me out of microbiology and infectious disease as kind of my fallback position. I was an expert in that area, and that's how I started in the farm industry.
Mm-hmm.
But by networking, I began to see that there were other opportunities. I could take on more leadership roles where I couldn't rely on my scientific or medical expertise
Mm-hmm.
to be credible. I had to pick up, leadership type capabilities. I had to understand how the company worked and how it focused,
Mm-hmm.
and it led me to network, because my philosophy has always been, it's not whom you know, it's who knows you,
Mm-hmm.
and what value you can bring to them and their organization. And I've been in pharma industry for 25 years. I've been in 6 different companies,
Mm-hmm.
all through mergers and acquisitions. And I've probably been through something like 15 reorganizations. But each time, I've been fortunate and privileged enough to land a job that's been something new,
Mm-hmm.
that's been different to what I've done in the past. And most scientific and medical discoveries have been based on failure. It's the learning from those failed experiments that allows us to build, and then really look at the opportunity and apply those learnings, to your own personal life, to your own professional life, or to the advancement of science and medicine. So, those great innovators were always learning from the
Mm-hmm.
failures and really taking that opportunity to advance the whole field forward.
I love how this conversation is coming to a close, because now we're kind of back on the rock, and looking to Africa and the world beyond. because that is, fear brings us to another level, and having the perspectives and taking the chances and looking at things holistically drives the planes that could also horrify you in your very first lecture. So thank you so much, Eddie, for sharing with us your experiences from here on out, for changing a perspective and how you build beyond fear through networking and creating a holistic plan while you're meeting the needs of others. So thank you very much for this, sharing this incredible journey with us, and for your commitment to fostering growth of others. It's truly inspiring. Thank you very much, Eddie.
Thank you. It's been my privilege and my pleasure, Marika. Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us on this insightful conversation with a leader who's not just successful, but it's also making a profound impact on the lives of many. So until next time, let's all get inspired to be more, do more, and live more. If you can be an inspiration to others or want to interview someone who inspired you, reach out or comment to join us on this mission to help others. Thank you very much for watching HEOS Talks. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you think it will impact others in a positive way. See you in the next episode.